Motions and resolutions. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that House File 5216 be taken from the table.
Representative Long moves that House File 5216 be taken from the table. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails. House File 5216 is taken from the table. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 5216, an act relating to state government, providing law for judiciary, public safety, and corrections, the second engrossment.
There are amendments at the desk. If there's no objection, we'll let the author explain the bill before we act on amendments. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and tag teaming with my partner as in justice, as always, Chair Moeller. So I will start with the judiciary portion of the bill. Members, this is the Judiciary and Public Safety Finance Bill. I'm going to actually start with the gratitude portion of this speech instead of doing it at the end. First and foremost, I want to thank my previously my LA and now my committee administrator, Anna Borgerding. I've been incredibly fortunate to have the same staff person with me throughout many years here in the Capitol, which we all know is something that has no price. So thank you, Anna. Ella Schultz, my LA, as well as Zach Meinertz, our researcher. Also want to thank our committee page, Joe Schatz, as well as our nonpartisan team, John Walls, Ben Johnson, Mary Davis, Nathan Hopkins, and although he wasn't here for any of session, Jeff Debo, who did a lot of the work in the interim helping us prepare for session. Also wanted to thank Lead Scott. I have been very fortunate in that the minority lead on my committee, I think we have always done this work respectfully together, and I do really appreciate, there's two women at the top getting the work done in judiciary. And my Vice Chair Frazier, as well as some incredible first-term members, and Representative Finke and Representative Curran. Last but not least, I want to thank the Sergeant staff. Sergeant at Arms Lori Hodap. Things often get heated outside of our committee with some of the topics that we address in judiciary as well as public safety, and incredibly grateful to the work of Sergeant staff and always being there when we need them, and sometimes when we don't even know that we're going to need them. So just wanted to start with that gratitude instead of rushing through it at the end. As far as the bill, despite having obviously a much smaller target this year, we have some important things in the bill. First, court interpreters. Folks may have heard quite a bit about this in the interim. So our court interpreters, in addition to working in a deficit, the rate that we're paying them is just not enough. It's obviously incredibly important for people to get justice, for them to be able to communicate properly in the courtroom. So we are increasing the rate for court interpreters, as well as adding some funding so that they can be reimbursed for their travel time throughout the state. Sort of the same sort of problem when it comes to forensic examiners. We're addressing a deficit there, as well as increasing their rate ongoing. We have a Safe and Secure Courthouse grant program. That's been an ongoing grant program, but we're replenishing that fund. We also have some funding for enhancements in cybersecurity of the court system. And then finally, in the area of the juror program, there was a deficit for the courts there as well. And then a small item but ongoing, we will be funding trauma services for jurors, obviously, as you prepare to share a lot of information about yourself when you're getting ready for jury service, as well as some of the things you're exposed to if you're a juror on a trial. We want to make sure that we're recognizing the humanity of our jurors as they do that important work for us. And then finally, we're creating a board of civil legal aid. So right now, civil legal services are funded underneath the Supreme Court, and they're not technically their own separate board. We're essentially mirroring what we have with the Board of Public Defense, but with a board of civil legal aid, which just clarifies some things and gives a little bit more autonomy to the legal services folks, especially when it comes down to budget time. Two other quick things on the judiciary side. We've got some updates to the Safe at Home program. You know, there's always some little tweaks that we need to make there to make sure that it's functioning as best that it can, as well as a small change in our restorative practices. So folks may not be aware, this is a Representative Feist bill, but so if a kid gets in trouble with the law, right now under the law, a child may be ordered to pay restitution. Obviously, if a child can't legally work, it's kind of, I don't think your allowance is going to allow you to pay restitution. And so it's essentially putting families who don't have a lot of resources into an even bigger hole where they're already struggling. And so little tweak there. We didn't necessarily have the funding to do much there, but we've at least allowed restorative justice programs, if there's a way to forgive those financial deficits that folks may have. An example we heard in committee was kids detailing cars to do work to earn back the mistakes that they've made. So some good things in the bill. Look forward to moving it forward, and I will turn it over to Chair Mueller. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I, too, want to start by thanking our staff in the Public Safety Committee. Ellen McDaniel, the committee administrator, is brilliant and did a fantastic job for us, along with Christian Lawrence, the committee legislative assistant, Maddie, our page, partisan staff, Zach Meinertz, John Holtquist, nonpartisan staff, some of whom we share with Judiciary, Ben Johnson, John Walls, Jeff Diebel, of course the revisor's office, and then the members, all the members of our committee. Special shout out to Vice Chair Feist, Lead Novotny, and again, just was a really great committee, and we had a lot of wonderful discussions. I also had on my notes that I wanted to make sure that we thanked the Sergeant at Arms and her staff, and Chair Becker-Finn and I did not discuss this in advance, but again want to thank the Sergeant at Arms, her staff. You really did show up for us for all our committee hearings here on the floor as well, and whenever any of us come to you with any concerns, you react with compassion, with kindness, and with swiftness, and we are so grateful for you and all that you do, so thank you very much. And now on to the bill. With the general fund dollars that we were allocated, we have two major buckets of funding. The first one is for the Department of Corrections deficiency funding. The bill funds their operating adjustment to cover increased compensation needs resulting from labor contract settlements to support retention and recruitment for corrections officers and staff across the department. And with this funding, with the contracts they just signed, they are at 97% staffing. They will be at 97% staffing, which is wonderful news. They had a workforce shortage there. And adequate staffing is important for the safety of all of the staff that are serving our correctional facilities, but also ensuring that people who are incarcerated have access to programming and other services that they need so that when they're released, they can be productive members of our communities. We also have another major bucket of funding for crime victim services at $9.5 million. Crime victim service funding is used to support victim survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, and general crime. The programs that provide these services across the state support annually more than 68,000 victims. These programs provide emergency shelter and crisis response, legal support, resources for healing, and other immediate needs like food and clothing. Crime victim services funding is a top priority this session, in large part because many of these programs have lacked an increase in funding for a while, and on top of that, they're experiencing significant cuts from federal dollars. We did last year try to close that gap with federal funding and giving them an additional increase, but the funds from the feds are actually depleting at a much greater rate than what was forecasted. We've heard that many organizations and shelters have had to limit their services. We even know of a shelter that had to shut down. And so I would just encourage members, if you, all of you have these programs in your district, when you're during the interim, go tour a shelter that's in your district and talk to the different crime victim advocates that are in your districts. The funding for these services has the support of 6 statewide advocacy organizations, as well as chiefs, sheriffs, local programs, county attorneys, schools, mental health professionals, and more. There will be a letter that's passed out on the floor today. I included all of those signatures because I hope that you'll take the time and look through at those signatures. You'll recognize some of the trusted community members who've signed on in support of this funding. I also just want to note that in the last week, with a couple of different bills on the floor, we have heard a lot of concern and support for victims of violence. I've heard colleagues across the aisle say things like focus on supporting victims, concern that we're leaving victims behind, focus on victims of felonies, we need to help victims of crime. Members, this is your opportunity today to support victims of crime with this bill, with this funding in this bill. With the remaining dollars that we have spent, we have a few different task forces, and we also have a first responder therapy dog grant program that Representative Mueller brought to us. So that was an exciting day in committee when we had that presentation. We have a task force on domestic violence and firearms, a working group to look at motor vehicle registration compliance. Over the years, we've talked about trying to eliminate stops of motorists that aren't related to public safety, and the bill doesn't do that. But one of the things we want to look at is eliminating the stops for people not paying their taxes, essentially, who have expired tabs. If we were going to do something like that in the future, we want to make sure that people still pay for their car registration, and so this working group is going to look into that. And then we have a task force on the holistic and effective response to illicit drug use. That's based on a research report that we had commissioned last year, and now we're seeking stakeholder input to implement that into the law. And then finally, there's funding through a special revenue account for training and professional standards for 911 dispatchers, and I want to thank Representative Igo and Representative Wolgamott for their work on this issue. And with that, I look forward to the amendments and questions from members. Thank you.
Representative Perryman offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Perryman moves to amend House Law number 5216, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Perryman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The A9 amendment adds language from a bill that I developed and dropped earlier in the session, House File 3945. And what it does is authorizes local governments to conduct a national criminal history check for applicants of a cabaret or massage business license. This is all in addition to what they do right now, and that is a state background check that they can do and are authorized to do at this time. The bill is also a result of sex traffickers who come to Minnesota to set up sex trafficking business that poses as a legitimate massage business. So let me repeat that. It's sex traffickers who come to Minnesota now and hurt our state to set up a sex trafficking business that poses as a legitimate massage business. There was a massage parlor in my area, Waite Park, and it opened up as a business. They went through all the state's approval for licensing. Waite Park checked it all out, and everything went through and they opened up. And there was no issues with their state background check. However, the city would have had, if they had had access to national background check information, they would have found the applicants were part of a multi-state sex trafficking operation. That is because we only have, and our local governments only have privy to state background information. I am having a news story passed around right now about the sex trafficking business that happened in the Waite Park area. Sex trafficking operations are not confined to my area. I bet you can think through your head right now. You've read an article that was close to home, or you read an article in the state of Minnesota that the prayers were praying on and continuing with sex trafficking. So this is an issue statewide. I know this is not the first time this has been addressed in the House. In fact, I understand this bill was first introduced in 2019 at the prompting of the Lino Lakes police chief, who discovered the same issue in his city, and the inability for Lino Lakes to have access to national criminal history information on the applications for a massage business license caused this issue as well in his area. The Minnesota Sheriff's Association and the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association supported the bill then, and I expect they will support it today. In fact, in the Waite Park, add a little side note, the Waite Park Chief of Police there, David Bentrud, has now retired. He's been retired now 2 years. But when I was understanding I was going to be able to offer this amendment, I called him Saturday and told him about this, and it was during also an event that Terabith was having, an event for raising money for sex trafficking mothers and women that are housed in St. Cloud in a housing that bring rehabilitation. They are so excited that this is coming through, and this is going to be a great amendment. The original bill, what's the difference? The original bill did include a broader group of business licenses. I, and working with others, decided to narrow this down so that we could really address the issue, and that is sex traffickers coming here under the pretense of a great massage parlor and passing state applications, but not understanding where they're coming from, that they may be carrying some issues from another state. And that's why we need the national criminal checking going on. So I ask for everyone's support, and I think it's a great bill, and it will help all Minnesota. And again, I just appreciate you considering it, and I look for a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Perryman, for your amendment. I'm going to recommend a green vote. It was a bill we were interested in hearing in committee, but we heard there might have been an issue at the time with the federal compliance, and we just didn't have the time to look into all of that. We have since learned that what we thought might have been an issue isn't actually an issue, and so I'm good with this language, and I'm going to recommend members vote yes. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, Representative Perryman, thank you for this amendment. It's a very good one. Over the years, it's an issue that I've worked on myself. It's been in the Public Safety Bill, Judiciary Omnibus Bill more than once, and I'm hoping this time that the Senate does take this. This is important. Sex trafficking is a huge problem in this state. Some of you might not know it, but it is everywhere, not just in Waite Park, but it's had issues with it in Anoka County, in other counties all across the state. Because of the fact that the licensing by these cities cannot check the background in other states where they've been, these perpetrators have been caught before, they're able to get a license in the states, and unfortunately they're learning that they have that ability, so they are more and more are coming here, and we need to stop it now.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Perryman, for the amendment, and thank you, Chair Moeller, for your encouragement of a yes vote on this. I just, as soon as Representative Perryman brought this up and I learned about the amendment, I immediately went to the Google machine, because in 2015, here's the headline on KARE 11, North Branch Massage Spa busted for prostitution. I know this is the kind of thing that lives in the shadows, but it's real, and it's real in the cities, and it's real in our small communities, and this is a really easy resource to give to our local communities to provide better public safety for all of us. So thank you.
Further discussion. I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Perryman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Rep. Moeller, for accepting it. Members of the House here, I'm really encourage a green board, to see a green board all lit up, but that's coming from me. But remember, Your lead over there, Representative Mueller, is supporting me as well. So listen to her wise words today, and let's have a green board, all right? Thank you, and do it for our public safety people. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails, and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Novotny moves to amend House File Number 5216, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My amendment A10 fixes a couple provisions of the bill that I think would be very beneficial. They are areas that I understand are still being worked on and negotiated with some of the major law enforcement groups. And I believe that they can make this bill better, and it's something that, with these two out, I would recommend green vote, and we could move on to the next bill. But we've got some questions and some procedural things we're going to have to address if they don't come out. But let me talk about the amendment to start with. The amendment addresses two parts of the bill. First off, on line 26.14, talking about the traffic stops and questions. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that Chair Mueller has worked with concerned stakeholders and has significantly pared down the bill, the language of the first bill. But what it is now is that on a traffic stop for 169 violations or 168 violations, which is the equipment sections that are commonly mentioned, that the peace officer must not ask the operator if they can identify the reason for the stop. The peace officer making a stop must inform the operator of the reason of the stop unless it would be unreasonable to do so under the totality of the circumstances. A peace officer's failure to comply with this section must not serve as the basis for exclusion of evidence or dismissal of a charge or citation. Section 645.241 does not apply to any violation in that section. That was put on, thank you, Chair Mueller, at the last hearing that we had, which is, it does not establish a basis for a penalty if a peace officer making a traffic stop fails to follow the exact language used when making this stop. Couple concerns that I have and some of the stakeholder groups have expressed is that A, what if they don't say it exactly right? B, it's not the basis for an exclusion, but could it be partially considered? And C, is it a stakeholder that would be very easily changed in the future? D is, it's unneeded. It's more of a policy. It should be put into post board as a recommended policy. It's a law with no penalty. It's a law with exceptions that don't apply in certain circumstances. I don't know why it's in the bill. It's a non-law. These are laws. We don't need non-laws there. Would Representative Petersburg yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Novotny.
Representative Petersburg, under the sections that I mentioned here, it's under 169.905. That'd be a traffic stop, and that's in the traffic codes. Did this bill get a hearing in transportation?
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Novotny. No, which is a little surprising because we did hear other bills in regards to that about other traffic stops, but that specific language we did not hear. And I'm going to anticipate that you're wondering why, and why is that important, and why is it important that this piece in this bill should have some additional hearing and vetting out. And it really gets into the integrity of not only this room in here and the people around it, but also the integrity of all of us. It's a process issue, and Chair Hornstein will let you know that I tend to be very specific about process and following the rules that we have, and we have many times we've discussed what is the right thing to do. And when I look around this body, I have great respect for each and every one of you in there. I have respect for this particular chamber as well, and it's everything that we do, all the rules that we have about process and so forth, is about building trust, integrity with the people out there in the general populace. And it's important for us to know that we continue to hold that up. It's the reason why we don't allow impugning in motives and why we don't do a lot of other things. We don't allow that because we want to uphold and keep ourselves to a high standard and high level of competency and respect by the individuals out there. It's the only way we can gain trust by the public so that they will continue to allow us to do our job. And one of the things that I've come to realize is over the last few years is that we have started to become a little bit more lenient on some of our rules and processes. And what I will tell you in my life's experience is that the respect that you're given and the integrity you have is not dependent upon when you follow the rules when it's easy. It's about when you follow the rules when it's tough, when it costs more of your time, when you really don't have the time to do it, when it's just difficult. Many times in my life, I said, well, I need to do this, but boy, I'd rather not, but I know I need to. It's just the right thing to do. This is one of those times in which here we have a process in which we're supposed to have each committee that has a certain responsibility over certain statutes are supposed to hear the bills that pertain to it. In this particular case, we have a traffic stop about violations. We heard some bills for it, but not this particular one, did not come through transportation. And it's not about whether or not it's a good bill or that it would pass through the transportation. It's about whether or not we're going to hold on to the transparency of what is supposed to happen. Because if we don't do that, then people start asking, well, they didn't follow the rules there. What aren't they also following the rules about? And so for me, this is a whole lot more about the process and what should be done and what we should hold ourselves accountable for than it is about whether or not this is a good portion of the bill or not. I'm going to let Representative Otney talk more about why he thinks it's a good or bad portion of the bill. I'm here saying this is what we should hold each other up to, which is a high level of integrity and respect, and follow the processes when it needs to be done, and let the chips fall where they may, but at least we can share with ourselves that we're doing everything right. It's the very reason why we have rules, why we'll have procedure, because those rules and procedures are a guide for all of us to use, not just some of us, not just a few of us. And yes, I know the speaker has opportunity to rule one way or another, and we can uphold that or not. The point, though, is what are we going to do internally? How do we feel about it? Why should we or should not do it? So in answer to your question, Representative Otney, this was not heard in transportation, and I think it should have been.
Representative Novotny.
Thank you for that answer, Representative Petersburg. Moving on to the second part of my amendment, it discusses the task force that we're going to set up and do working group on different ways to pay motor vehicle registration tax. So in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a substantial decrease in the amount of traffic stops that have been done for several reasons. Some of the bigger cities, less than half of the officers are available to do these traffic stops. And for fear of prosecutions and amendments that we'll be speaking with shortly, people are hesitant. And since traffic stops are way down and enforcement is way down, one of the things that has been observed in especially the more densely populated areas is that people aren't paying for their tabs. This is concerning to me as someone who did law enforcement before insurance was mandatory, and I saw the effects of people that would be hit by someone without insurance and all the things that would be associated with that. The Minnesota insurance mandatory on your car and having no-fault insurance is good, but if the other owner doesn't have anything to go after, your insurance company is still going to end up eating the bill. one of the major obstructions for people getting the tabs, because the tabs are cheap, depending on what you're driving. If you're driving an older vehicle, if you're driving a new vehicle, it's obviously a lot more. But if you're driving an older vehicle, the tabs are cheap. It's the insurance that's expensive. And if you don't have the proof of insurance, you can't get the tabs. Going back to my meltdown the other night, once again, thank you for everyone for having patience with me on that. But I talked about the lowering of the bar, and this is an example of lowering the bar. Instead of expecting people to pay for their tabs, we'll just figure out a different way to do it. We'll create a whole nother bureaucracy. We'll probably have to have a commissioner. We need more government, as opposed to just expecting people to follow the laws. If you don't believe in modern humanity, you've never driven on a two-lane road. So you must have your faith in your fellow man. There's some social constructs we're all supposed to follow. If you don't stop before going through a controlled intersection because you assume that everyone else will obey their red stoplights because you've got a green stoplight, you've got faith in your fellow human, right? If you're on a two-lane road, you expect them to follow the speed limit. You expect them to follow the rules of the road. You expect them to have insurance. One of the ways that is done is through the tabs. So instead of expecting people to follow the socially accepted norms that we have, we're just going to lower the bar. To me, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations. Lower the bar, lower the bar, lower the bar. We'll do something different, as opposed to just following the social contracts that we all have. Now, we've got $133,000 to come up with a study on how we're going to get around enforcing tabs. Now, I don't know. There's something that I'm sure I'm going to be explained here why we don't want to stop cars for having expired tabs, because that might be a good way to find out if they've got stolen plates. It might be a good way to find out if the plates are, or the vehicle's stolen. Who knows? Well, we're just going to ignore stuff. We're going to put on the blinders and ignore that it's all good just so that we can avoid some of these situations. Minnesota State Patrol, some of the larger departments in this state, stop thousands of cars a day for various violations. And the percentage of those things going as they are supposed to, the driver pulls over to the side of the road, there's an exchange of information, there's a warning or a citation, or based on things, once the driver gets pulled over, there might be an arrest based on either what the officer discovers or what the officer is told. Maybe the person pulled over for a simple traffic violation or expired tabs turns out to have a felony pickup order for domestic assault or a restraining order violation, or they know that they're sitting on a firearm, or they're sitting on pounds of marijuana. We've seen multiple homicide investigations solved in this state by a simple traffic stop for equipment violations, which led to a search, which led to discovery of a firearm, which led to a forensic examination, which solved homicides. And we can keep doing that, and we can solve homicides. And by solving one homicide, you prevent the next homicide. Or we can keep putting our blinders on. I suggest we take the blinders off and we follow our social constructs. And with that in mind, I repurpose that money that would be just for a working group and would just lead to a suggestion, which would then lead to who knows whatever administrative solution to the problem that's not a problem if everything else was followed. But if we take that money and put it to something good, there's a program in Minneapolis. It's started by Don Samuels. It's called Lights On. And I believe, what's the bill? Representative Tabke's got the bill 5075, which I understand is getting some funding. But what the Lights On bill does is it gives the officers a chance to give a voucher to the operators of the vehicle, and then they can take this voucher to a mechanic and use that to get their vehicles fixed, which solves two problems. One, it gets the equipment violation fixed, and there's safety and equipment violations they're there for a reason, okay? Headlights out, motorcycle season's coming up. If you got a vehicle with a headlight out, you don't know if it's a car or a motorcycle. If it's a vehicle that doesn't have taillights at work, that's something that should get fixed. Smashed windshields, that is all covered, and the Lights On program can help with that. And that's where I feel the money should go, would be about a 10% bump to what they're getting for the Lights On program. But, you know, that's money that's good. That's money that'll help. And it'll also make a good contact, and it'll make for a positive interaction with law enforcement. And the people will not be mad. I would hope that this program, either way, I support it. I'm a co-author on Representative Tabke's bill because I think it's a very good idea, and it's a good process. And that is my vote, and I ask for your support.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Novotny, I appreciate your preview of an argument for a discussion that we may have in future years around traffic stops. This bill doesn't do any of the things that you are attempting to address today. It doesn't stop officers from pulling folks over for those safety issues. It doesn't do that. What this bill does, it does allow for the task force to get together to discuss how we can allow for people to pay for those registration tabs, which is an issue right now. There are folks right now where we may have an issue collecting those registration tabs. We want to find a way to be efficient and effective when we capture those registration tabs. That's important. Not to mention, we've had officers on multiple occasions say they'd like to get out of the tax collection business. I think we can find a way to get there, and we're doing it in a thoughtful and I believe an appropriate way by bringing all the stakeholders together to have that conversation, and we need to provide funding to allow for that to happen. And you mentioned that Representative Tabke is carrying a Lights On bill. He is, and there's $1.2 million that are going to the funding of that initiative, and I think that is sufficient. This $133,000 for this project to deal with the registration fees is appropriate, it is needed, it is what is told that we need to have this conversation and come up with a plan for that. So I'm going to ask for a no vote overall on this amendment, but I wanted to explain why for that particular piece. Now, to your language in regards to an officer pulling someone over for a stop, which is limited to 168 and 169, which is equipment violations, all we're asking is that when you approach that vehicle, the officer, all you have to do is not ask the individual, why did I pull you over? Or do you know why I pulled you over? We're asking you not to ask someone to make a self-admission. I think that brings the temperature down when you have those engagements. I think this is low-hanging fruit. I think this is something that we should all get on board with. I think that this is something that can go a long way in helping to build those community and law enforcement officer relationships. I don't think this is a negative thing. I think this is a positive thing. Also, what we know is in other states where they have implemented this law, places like Rhode Island, Maryland, Connecticut, and California, we've either seen a significant drop in deaths of motorists from interactions involving those stops, or we have seen that those deaths have been eliminated altogether with the implementation of laws like this. I don't think this is a problematic thing. I think this is a positive thing. I think this is the way we need to go, the direction we need to head into. It's almost odd and surreal that every time I stand up and we're having this conversation in public safety, that I have to continue to remind us as a state, as a legislator, we are still responding to some very tragic situations that have happened in our state when it comes to traffic violation stops. We're still responding to those things. And it is up to us to continue to respond in a way that is proactive to ensure that we continue to eliminate or strive to eliminate those interactions from escalating to a way where we're losing lives. So Representative Novotny, when you say we are trying to address a problem that doesn't exist, I reject that assertion because we are absolutely trying to address something that has been tragic after tragic situations in the state of Minnesota. If we can save lives, we should be taking the task and meeting the moment to save those lives. So for all those reasons, I am recommending a no vote on this amendment. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Novotny, thank you for this amendment. Dealing with the issue of the stop itself, I'm going to explain something that happened to me while I was working. Now, everybody knows the tabs on your cars are a different color. Of course, it corresponds by year. I met this car, if I remember correctly, it was a 1982 Ford Crown Vic LTD. The tabs were almost a year expired. I could tell that by the sticker, by the color. I think it was just over a year expired. So I turned on it, caught up to it, ran the plate, and pulled it over. I got the information on the vehicle back, and it belonged to Bonnie and Melvin, good friends of mine from church. The interesting thing, neither one of them was driving it because they were in Florida over the winter. They were snowbirds. Went up to the driver, asked for his identification, and just asked him why, or if he happened to know why I pulled him over. So he said, I have no idea. So I explained to him, I pulled you over because your tabs are expired. Do you happen to have insurance? Once I got up there, I recognized the name on the driver's license. The individual that's been dealt with many times with the sheriff's office. First time I've had dealings with him. Went back to my car, radioed another officer who went and checked Bonnie and Melvin's residence. They found the basement door kicked in. I happened to have Melvin's phone number, called him up, and he said nobody should be using the car. What it was, I just stumbled across the burglary. Had the suspect, had their car, and in the trunk, after redoing the inventory, found a lot of property that belonged in the house. Now, every stop is different that we do. It might be when we deal with them, once you have the car stopped, you walk up, you might see something in the car, you might notice something. Everyone is different, and it changes how you react to the person in the car. How are they reacting at the stop? Are they fidgeting? It's all different things that officers are observant to make sure that they are safe and the person that's in that car is safe. Now, Representative Frazier talked about some unfortunate incidents that occurred. Every one occurred because of the reaction the individual decided to do. If they cooperate, guess what? Usually nothing happens. But when you don't cooperate, that's when things can go south in a hurry. Officers detain the person just long enough to do their job. They don't want to detain them for a long time if they don't have to. Generally, they don't want to have to bring them to jail, but it's because of the actions of the perpetrator that causes them to go there. So thank you, Representative Novotny. taking a tool out of the toolbox doesn't help law enforcement. In fact, it hurts, and it hurts the safety of the public. Now, with this task force that's being set up, I can tell you why tabs aren't being paid. Minneapolis alone is down about 50% of their officers working. They don't have time to even do traffic stops. When I drive in Minneapolis, I've got to the point when I have a green light, I still stop to make sure nobody's coming through the red light. I slow down at every intersection because I don't know who's going to blow through the stop sign. And I've had it happen to me numerous times when I've been driving over there. It's happened over here in St. Paul. The attack on law enforcement has to stop. It's not helping. So Representative Novotny, thank you for this amendment. I've seen how that voucher system works. It works great. The more positive contacts officers can have, the better it is for the public. The better it is to have good conversations, positive interactions with the public. It makes things work better. So thank you, Representative Adi. Please support this amendment.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We seem to be dancing around the particulars of what we're talking about when we talk about what happens at a traffic stop, whether it's for a light out or because someone's tabs are expired or whatever the cause may be. I heard Representative Frazier say, and hopefully I heard him correctly, and I'm not misquoting him here, that the implementation of this policy, which, just to be clear, throttles how an officer may engage with a subject at a traffic stop, that the implementation of this policy in other states has resulted in, as I believe he phrased it, fewer deaths of motorists during encounters with law enforcement that have escalated. And it's an interesting little rhetorical dance that evades some crucial details. If a situation is escalating to the point where lethal force is being deployed by an officer, the subject has become a little bit more than a motorist at that point. They're a suspect, and they're likely a suspect who is defying lawful orders and not complying with the officer. That's how the escalation of use of force works. I mean, unless we're suggesting that police officers are just cold-bloodedly shooting people at traffic stops for no reason without any lawful justification, if that's the idea, which I don't think it is, then we need to have a different conversation. But in the context of what we're discussing today, if somebody's being pulled over and if there's an escalation in the use of force, it is because there's a lawful sequence of events taking place. Perhaps it was discovered that the person was engaged in some other crime unrelated to the traffic stop. Perhaps it's discovered that the person has a warrant out for their arrest or to be detained. And they are ordered to comply. They're ordered to get out of the car. They're ordered to do this, that, or the other thing, and they refuse to comply. That's the source of the escalation. And so what I think is missing from the picture of looking at other states, and I'm going to take the data claim for granted, that there's been a reduction in escalations in states where this policy has been adopted. What I would suggest is that what's actually happening there is that subjects who should be getting detained, subjects who should be getting arrested, subjects who are engaged in criminal behavior are getting away without being found, without being detected, because of the throttling that's been placed, the oven mitts that have been put on officers engaging in traffic stops. It's not a good policy. We want our laws to be enforced. We want folks who have arrest warrants issued for them to be found and to be detained and to be processed. We want criminals off the street. And those of us who are not criminals don't have anything to worry about when we get pulled over and asked, do you know why I pulled you over? You're not engaged in crime, you don't have a warrant out for your arrest, you engage with the officer respectfully, you're gonna go home. And that really is, as it's been discussed in committee and as we're discussing it here on the House floor today, the underlying intention as expressed, I'm not speculating, as expressed in committee, is exactly that, to reduce encounters with law enforcement, to reduce incidents that could potentially escalate, as if the contact with the officer is the reason for the escalation. And that's simply not true. I mean, if that's what we really believe, if we really believe that contact with law enforcement is the reason for escalations, then perhaps we should just get rid of police officers? Interesting alternative theory. In reality, the reason for these escalations is because the subject is not abiding by lawful orders, the subject is engaged in criminal behavior, the subject is being dealt with lawfully and is refusing to cooperate, and that is what escalates the situation. It is the criminal who is the source of the problem here, not law enforcement and not current law.
Further discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I feel like we're debating about a bill that's not before this body right now. We are not saying that you cannot stop folks for these traffic stops. We're merely saying that you can't ask an individual why you're being pulled over or why did I stop you. I don't know why this is such a controversial thing, and the data is clear from what I said around the states that have put this in place already. And just to this whole idea of compliance. Again, in a state where we've had such tragedy, we're talking about something that we know individuals were complying, and yet we've had to have vigils for those individuals. Philando Castile was complying. In fact, he did exactly what he was told he should do in a situation like that. And yet he was murdered in front of his girlfriend and a child. That is what happened. So we have to stop it with this comply and you'll go home. We know it is not true, specifically for men that look like me. We know it's not true. Vote no on this amendment.
Further discussion. I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, part of the concern is that we saw what the language was in the don't ask language when it started with, and the fear of what it'll become next year. I fear that police officers, for the fear of misstating something when they walk up to the car, won't do the job. Little birdie dropped off a statistic for me here. In 2022, St. Paul Police Department records show that 61 illegal possession of firearms convictions were due to pretextual traffic stops. 61 guns resulted in convictions. 61 guns were taken off the street by someone that was not supposed to have a gun. My fear is that those stops aren't going to happen anymore. My fear is that drivers with no insurance will continue to rage. That's our fear. And since you're recommending a no vote, Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be roll call. Representative Novotny.
Thank you, members. This is a good bill. This is a bill that would make Representative Moeller's public safety omnibus bill all green in the future when we take the final vote. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no.
The clerk will close the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Representative Novotny.
I move to refer this bill to transportation. What's that?
Representative Novotny, we're in the middle of roll call right now. All right, the clerk will close the roll. Now, there being 60 ayes and 68 noes, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Novotny.
Madam Speaker, I move that this bill be re-referred to transportation so that this bill could be properly vetted. And I request a roll call on that.
Seeing 50 hands, there will be roll call. Representative Novotny moves for the bill to be referred to public safety? Committee of Transportation. Members, just to reinstate the motion, Representative Novotny moves to re-refer the bill to the House Committee of Transportation, Finance and Policy Committee. Discussion. I recognize Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to recommend a no vote on this. This bill was vetted, and this particular language was vetted twice in the Public Safety Committee. We also had the grace of Chair Olson when we heard this bill in the Ways and Means Committee, and based on questioning from the other side of the aisle, we had an oral amendment at that time to even improve the language further. We have never heard that anybody wanted to hear it in transportation. It's never been requested before. And I find it interesting when we were discussing this language with the last amendment, somebody said, it's a non-law, it does nothing. Well, it's actually clarifying an expectation, but if it is a non-law that does nothing, I'm not sure why we're so nervous about having it in this bill now. So I'm going to recommend a no vote on that motion. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Watsika, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would recommend a yes vote. As I said earlier, it isn't about whether or not this is the right bill or that this is going to be properly vetted or that it's even going to be approved or not approved. This is about us following the process, even when it's tough and is not easy, because this is something that should have gone through transportation, whether or not anybody asked for it or not. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in other committees that I'm not aware of, and so it's important for us to always maintain the integrity of the process so that we all can have confidence in each other, that we're following the rules, and the public can have confidence that we are actually doing what we said, and they will have an opportunity to vet and have information and actually input into our decisions. So it's something that we can do quickly. We could have it done fairly soon and move forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, I've noticed a pattern over the last 2 years. We have many bills that should go to committees that don't. Once in a while, they get re-referred off this floor back to those committees, but not very often. There's been a number of bills that should have gone to the committees I sit on because I had questions on them. but wasn't able to because they never made it to that committee, even though that committee had jurisdiction over things in those bills. Now, the chair might have been in the Ways and Means, but were the other members of the Transportation Committee on both sides of the aisle in Ways and Means so they could ask questions about this? No. It goes to those committees because that's where that committee has jurisdiction to really vet that area. Now, 168 is in the Transportation Committee. It didn't go there. If we don't follow our rules when it's easy, how are we going to follow them when they're hard? And if we don't follow the rules that this body set, there's no reason to have any rules. And if you don't have rules, just like if we don't have laws, it's anarchy, it's mob. So I think it's time to start following the rules of this body, or we can just throw the rule book away. Send this back to transportation.
Further discussion? Seeing no, Representative Novotny? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 noes, the motion to re-refer does not prevail. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House File Number 5216, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A15, members, is an amendment that came out of a news story in KSTP on May 1st. You might have seen it. And it is a Minnesota 911 manager that was living in Virginia that there were some problems that resulted around that. And the gist of the amendment is that we should have emergency workers for the Department of Public Safety living in the state. Now, I will go on record. I will tell you that I believe in remote work, and people who are not associated with something along the lines of an emergency management system or emergency, if they want to work in somewhere else, that's fine. If you work in a back office job, if you're in charge of making reports or processing things, great. If it saves the state money and does the same work, that's fine. However, if we are talking about a person that works in our emergency management system, I think we could all agree that they should live in the state of Minnesota or directly adjacent to it. Like in Wisconsin, if they live in Hudson, okay, I get it. They're taking advantage of the low taxes over there. And I think that what we should look at is what is the response time of somebody who is tasked with marshaling people or responding quickly to something that needs responding to. And the pages are passing out, I believe, the report or the KSTP piece. Again, I support remote work, but not in an emergency management situation. And I just want to be clear, the employee was never accused of violating any policies, but I think the policy needs to be changed. Because again, it just makes sense that if we have an emergency here in the state of Minnesota that requires their attention, they should be able to report quickly to, we'll call it the mothership or headquarters. So if something goes sideways, they should be able to hop in the car and be here within a reasonable amount of time. And that's what I'm trying to get done. And I think that if you liken it to what we heard in the Public Safety Committee, I don't know, Representative Rarick can correct me, but when I was on the Public Safety Committee, many of you advocated for police officers living in the policing district that they were working for, because you wanted them to be present and you wanted them to be able to respond quickly and be a part of the problem solving that was going on there. So it's a very straightforward amendment. It doesn't have any fiscal implication that I know of. And I think that the primary place in the line 1.1, primary place of employment, is here in Minnesota. I think that if you're an emergency management manager or employee, you should be in the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Nash. I think what you're trying to accomplish, while I understand it, creates a really broad, you paint with a really broad stroke here, because your amendment isn't limited to just emergency communication managers. Your amendment deals with all employees of the Department of Public Safety, which has almost 2,300 employees. A large percentage are not first responders and don't have emergency response duties. Those employees at DPS, I'm told, that have such duties are required to be located within a certain geographic area according to their position. I'll also note that certain members of the Department of Public Safety, certain employees, have to be sent out to other locations of the state to do their job. I personally experienced that when I handled some cases, criminal cases, when I worked at the Attorney General's office, and there were homicides in greater Minnesota. The BCA often has agents that will go and actually, some of these homicides can take weeks to prosecute, and so you basically set up camp in these jurisdictions during the trial. And the way your amendment is worded, it says not only must they have a primary residence within Minnesota or a bordering state, they must be able to report to their primary place of employment within 1 hour of notification. Well, that would be impossible for some of those staff members of Department of Public Safety who are on location. I would also note, too, this hour away for other employees who aren't necessarily in an emergency response scenario. Many of these employees might have their headquarters here in St. Paul. They actually might live in your districts and be outside of an hour away. And so you would be saying basically that they could no longer be employees of the Department of Public Safety. So unfortunately, Representative Nash, for all those reasons, I'm going to recommend a no vote. Thanks.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, thank you for this amendment. If you work in law enforcement, you have to have a reasonable response time from where you live to where you work. Now, Representative Mueller brought up the fact that BCA agents are sometimes could be anywhere in the state working a homicide. Guess what? That's where assigned work area is. They're going to be there, especially if they have to stay in a hotel, because they're working there. That would qualify. They could be assigned anywhere in the state to help out our local law enforcement officers or working on a case of their own. But that's their assignment, so that they'd qualify. But when we have emergency management directors for the state living halfway across this country, and there's an emergency, so they have to jump on an airplane, take a 3-hour plane ride, besides being at the airport at least 2 hours ahead of time to get on a plane, drive into the airport, you're looking at 6 hours, 8 hours before they get on scene of an emergency. That long a time frame, it's not an emergency. So I think it's important that they live close to the area and not halfway across the country. Please support the Nash Amendment.
Further discussion. I recognize the author, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I think that Representative Johnson makes a good point that if you are to be part of the response team, that you should be very close. And I did take some time and spoke to a friend of mine who deals with crisis and emergency management. And their professional opinion was that that deployable asset, we'll just call it that way, that the deployable asset really should be in the area. And I think that I understand the argument from Chair Moeller, I do. And perhaps when we're in charge next year, we can work on it together. I don't want to go down the road that Representative Robbins did last week and give you guys the majority for next year, but I'll promise to work with you next year on this. But we could still do it today, and I would encourage a yes vote.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adopting the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Nash offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House File Number 5216, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A12.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A12. Well, if you're not aware of the Trooper Londrigan situation, maybe you don't watch a lot of television or read the newspaper or a lot of other things. But the A12 is an amendment that would, as it says on line 1.9, take $133,000 in fiscal year 2025 and move that to the Attorney General in order to give the Attorney General's office necessary resources to handle the case that has been filed against Trooper Londrigan. Now, further down, you'll see that if Trooper Londrigan, if the charges are dismissed, that any unencumbered amount of that money can be sent back to the general fund. And here's why that's important. Because he's innocent. And we have been told again and again and again and again, I think that's 4 agains, because 4 use of force experts have said that this was a justifiable use of force that Trooper Londrigan used in protecting both the public and his partner. And what we have seen is a very activist county prosecutor making this, I think, very difficult for the Trooper family. And I would also say that for the governor, because the governor had said on a number of occasions, and this is in a Fargo radio, KFGO, Fargo, in an interview, he said, this is Governor Walz quoting directly, "A request could have been made to the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, for help," Walz said. "A request could have been made to the Ramsey County prosecutor for help. A request could have been made to anyone. That is a normal procedure to ask. Those requests were not made." Members, I think it's super important that we recognize that when somebody like Trooper Londrigan puts on that uniform to go and protect and serve and fight to keep people safe, including their partner, that in a situation where we are taught to run away from danger, they are taught to run towards it. And when 4 use of force experts say that this was a justifiable situation, why are we not listening to the experts? Why are we not saying 4 use of force experts have made it very clear that Trooper Londrigan is innocent? A good number of our members have served in law enforcement, and they have been asked to do very similar things. They have been asked to put their life on the line. They have been asked to defend the public. They have been asked to defend their partner, to stand in the way of harm. What we are seeing is, in my estimation, a very broad and unexplicable reason for pursuing this case. What we learned recently, too, is that there is now an outside law firm that has been hired at a minimum, a floor of $750,000 payment guaranteed before, the agreement reads that if once it goes past or is bumping up against $750,000, they will have to come back and ask for the ability to spend more money. The blended rate of these extra prosecutors is $850 an hour to prosecute a case where the use of force experts, 4 of them, have said this was a justifiable use of force. So I would hope that today, as we are here, that we would listen to experts. Use of force experts, and I know that Representative Novotny is going to talk a little bit about what is a use of force expert, what do they do, how do they evaluate these things, and what does it mean when they say that it was a justifiable use of force when they make that report. Members, Trooper Londrigan has done his job. And I know I saw a good number of you at the Burnsville funeral for the 3 first responders. They were doing the same thing. Trooper Londrigan defended the public. Trooper Londrigan defended his and protected his partner. And sadly, Hennepin County Attorney Moriarty has decided to push this and push this and push this, even against the recommendation of use of force experts. I can't understand that. You know, up here at the Capitol, we have experts come in regularly and we hear them testify in committee, or we get their opinions submitted by a letter, or we listen to them as we are building and crafting legislation. I know that the voice of an expert here at the Capitol carries weight. 4 experts, 4, have said that this was a justifiable use of force. I don't know how we walk past this. I don't know how we avoid this. And Madam Speaker, I know that there are some other members that would like to speak to this, so I will be done now. But the trooper is innocent. Let's make sure that we recognize that here today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion to the Nash Amendment. The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Nash, under normal circumstances, I would take great joy in telling you that you're wrong, because you're wrong. But I will not celebrate that based on the circumstances that we have. Representative Nash, it's been 7 use of force experts and trainers that have been involved in this. 4 from the patrol, 2 the defense have hired, and never forget the use of force expert that was brought in by Hennepin County to start with. I believe his name was Nobles. And if you'll remember, that's the same use of force expert that Hennepin County brought in as a hired gun several times to testify in other cases. And since he had sided with the prosecution in those cases, he was brought back for this one. And when he said that the charges and did not, that the situation did not rise up to a level of being charged in violation of Minnesota state statutes, the very statutes that we fixed and put together ourselves in the last session. So it's 7 use of force experts. But let's talk about the money. So $133,000 that we could have available for the Attorney General's office if we do this. Breaking it down, the average Hennepin County attorney, the top Hennepin County attorney, I would assume they'd have the most senior, most experienced attorneys working for them, $155,000 a year. Kind of to put it in perspective for you, what the I would assume the Attorney General's office lawyers would be maybe in the same ballpark, maybe a little more. Putting that in numbers against what the step-toe contract is for the hired gun prosecutors out of Washington, D.C., that $133,000 for 2 attorneys at 40 hours a week would last about 1.95 weeks. That's not considering travel. That's not considering lodging. I will give the Hennepin County Board an award for fiscal responsibility. They will reimburse Steptoe for a coach flight, and they have to take light rail from the airport to their lodging, or that's their reimbursed rate. Because I can see a hired gun lawyer from Washington, D.C. riding the light rail from the airport to wherever they're going. There will be other people talking about this, but I will give you a situation that I was involved in when I was assigned to the range, and I was a full-time trainer at the time, use of force instructor, firearms instructor, and we had a situation where there was an individual who was stopped by a member of the State Patrol, and one of the county officers stopped to assist him. And there was a long exchange at the door where it was determined that the individual was under the influence of something and they wanted him to get out of the car. Now, I don't know what the initial reason for the stop was. I don't know what the initial conversation for the stop was. Now, the back window of the vehicle was broke out when he was pulled over. So I don't know if when the trooper walked up to the car, if the trooper asked him if he knew why he was being stopped. And, well, I guess I could go back and listen to the tapes, but it really didn't matter. It really didn't matter because that's not when things went sideways. That's not when things went sideways on that traffic stop. That's not when things went sideways on all the other traffic stops that we are talking about in the previous bill and cited by Representative Frazier. That's not what we're talking about. If there was one case where someone walked up to the door and said, I'll get back to the case. I'll get back to the amendment that we're talking about. What we did when that situation, oh, I forgot to finish the story. He was very drunk. He'd already been in a couple crashes already. That's why his window was backed out. And they didn't want him to drive away because they were fearful for the other people in the area. So they said the magic words, "You're under arrest," which I could be wrong, but the words "you're under arrest, get out of the car" were mentioned in just about all the other cases that we're trying to fix that wouldn't be fixed by the legislation that we're proposing to fix the legislation. And he said, bleep, put the car in drive, the truck in drive, and attempted to drive away. And the troopers and the deputy attempted to stop him. And the trooper was dragged down the road. And after about 100 yards, and I know this because he had a body mic on, he informed the individual that if you don't stop, I will bleeping kill you. And he accelerated. So he took the actions that he needed to stop this deadly force situation. We looked at the incident, we took the Minnesota state statutes, we took our training manual, we took our policy manual on use of force, and that was just squad cameras. All we had was the audio and the squad cameras. We didn't have the body-worn cameras. And the county attorney looked at this and said, this is clearly a case where deadly force was authorized. And that was it. We didn't have to spend $2 million by the time that we're going to get done with this case. That's what their average billing is on one of these hired guns cases. Isn't that the number, Representative? 1.9 million? Yep. So We've got a case. Representative Mueller herself referenced the fact that she's participated in homicide investigations, conflict cases, I don't know what it was, or just an expert case. Hennepin County Attorney's Office handles, 75, 80 homicide cases a year? And they can't handle this one that's videotaped from 3 body cameras and 3 squad cameras. And we're talking about 3 seconds worth of time that we have to decide was the proper use of force applied at the proper time, not who did who to what when. This is not a whodunit, guys. Not a whodunit. I believe that the county attorney's office, if they can't do it, should send it to the state attorney general's office. And I would almost guarantee you that there's someone at the attorney general's office that would be able to review Minnesota state statute and state patrol policy on use of force, and we could get this done. Members, I ask you to support Representative Nash's amendment. It's a very good amendment, and it makes a lot of sense for the taxpayers of Minnesota.
I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a vested interest in this as I have family members who are in law enforcement, and I know it takes a lot of bravery, a lot of courage to put your life on the line to protect Minnesotans. And at times, those law enforcement officers have to protect themselves and their partners, the people they work with. And I think it's time for the Attorney General or the Governor to act and to come to the aid of innocent law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line and find themselves coming under attack in Hennepin County. This is a witch hunt, and it appears that law enforcement can't get a fair shake in Hennepin County. So here's an opportunity for us right now to send a message to the governor, to the attorney general, and I hope they do act to help preserve sanity when it comes to protecting our great, courageous, brave law enforcement officers. As it was already pointed out, thank you, Representative Novotny, for pointing that out, that State Patrol trainers said that Trooper Londrigan acted in accordance with his training. Hennepin County Attorney's own use of force expert said that Trooper Londrigan acted reasonably. Their own use of force expert. He acted in defense of another state trooper, and thank God that he did, or else we could have been attending another funeral for our great law enforcement. I won't prolong this, I just wanted to say it. He acted lawfully to protect. Now let's act on this floor to protect him. Please vote yes on the 812 amendment, members. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have a responsibility as public officials, as literal representatives of our constituents, of the people of Minnesota, of the state of Minnesota, to stand by our law enforcement officers, and certainly not to demonize them, as has been a pattern for several years. And, you know, when we discussed a previous amendment, reference was made to a high-profile police encounter where use of force escalated. and there was an officer-involved shooting that resulted in death. And we hear reference to these sorts of stories all the time, and they're highlighted as if they are indicative of the norm. This is what always happens. It always goes down like this. Except it doesn't at all. In 2022, just in this city, just in St. Paul, there were 12,903 traffic stops. 12,903 that didn't all, or even mostly, or even substantially result in escalations to officer-involved shooting or fatality or lethality. When I say that compliance is the responsibility of the subject, when they become a suspect, when they've received a lawful order from a law enforcement officer, that's just obvious. And in virtually all of these situations that get pointed to and highlighted as examples of why law enforcement as a profession is so suspect that we have to put oven mitts on them and throttle their ability to engage with subjects, engage with the public. We have to reduce contacts. When we do that, we're defaming an entire profession and every single officer who engages in it. And there's an opportunity here with this amendment to take a significant step in the other direction, to say, you know what? We're not going to prioritize reducing contacts and spend money on that. What we're going to spend money on is sending the very clear message to radically out-of-touch prosecutors that you need to follow the evidence when you're considering a prosecution or you're trying to engage in a prosecution, and not unfairly defame and persecute through prosecution our law enforcement. Vote green.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I speak often in this chamber about the initiative to support our law enforcement 365 days a year. Unfortunately, on this case, Mary Moriarty has created a mess. And this is just not me and the public and everyone else. This is other county attorneys and attorneys that have talked about this. Moriarty has shown her bias against police, and that someone independent of her office should be looking at this case. She's created such a mess that there's no way to move forward without an expert witness. And as we heard from Representative Novotny, there's been 7 and 2 from the defense side. This is not fair for either side of this case. In Hennepin County, you put your resources in the most important cases that are high profile. And throughout the state, I don't know if there's a higher profile case currently. Well, maybe there's one more higher profile case. But in Hennepin County, there are 140 attorneys. You remove your resources and put them onto the cases that are most important. That is why Mary Moriarty has so mishandled and complete mess of this case. She had some opportunities to take it to a grand jury to determine if the force was necessary. She had the opportunity to ask for assistance, and why she hasn't asked another county attorney, maybe from Ramsey, Anoka, Dakota. And why are you not referring it to the AG's office? Recently, in a Star Tribune article, Governor Walz, who recently expressed concern about Moriarty's handling of this case, actually told reporters that he does not see how outside legal counsel as a positive development, calling the decision somewhat unorthodox. It seems to him a well-funded and robust office like the Hennepin County DA should be able to handle this case. The rule of law matters. And Minnesotans are looking at this case. Our law enforcement puts those uniforms on and are asking for our support. They need the strength to go out there and do their job. What I would tell Governor Walz right now is we need leadership. We need real leadership, and I'm asking for the Governor Walz to make a decision. If there is a conflict with the civil side of this, with the State Patrol, he has said in the past that they can build a wall. And if there is a conflict, let's trust in our AG to make that decision, to go outside and look at possible retired prosecutor and independent investigator to handle this case. I had the opportunity to go to state troopers' graduation. And the colonel spoke about a family, but a teamwork and how they work together. Each day we walk through this chamber and the state troopers are out there protecting us. But this has an effect on them too, because they're out there putting that uniform on. And I think this amendment would give us an opportunity to least show some support for our law enforcement and let it go the way the courts need it to go. But it's time for a fair hearing, and I ask that you guys support this amendment, not just for Trooper Longren, all the state troopers, all the law enforcement officers that are putting those uniforms on every day. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Clearwater, Representative Grossell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise in support of the Nash Amendment. And when you look at how things have developed, and you look at no one in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office wanting to touch this case, that should tell you something. That should tell you something. There's nothing there for them to prosecute. This is a case of Trooper Lonigan doing his job. And just like any other peace officer in the state of Minnesota or in this nation, when you have to make that decision to use deadly force, it's usually about a window of about 1 second, maybe 2. One second, maybe 2. In working in gangs, guns, violent crimes, and so on, I've had to make those decisions. Shoot, no shoot. And I only have a window of about 1 or 2 seconds. I thank God every day that I never had to squeeze that trigger on another human being. And there's a lot of officers across this nation who have been in that window as well, who are giving thanks every day that they didn't have to do that. But for the ones that do, for anyone who has never put on that uniform, who has never been put in those life or death situations, and you have to make a decision in that short of a time, in that window, don't ever judge them. You got no place judging them. Now, the high-profile case that was mentioned before, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but that officer was acquitted. That individual was not murdered. So when you say things on this House floor, you better have looked at the evidence. You better have looked and watched the videos to see what happened there. Do not tell half-truths on this floor. The Lonergan situation, it needs to be resolved. When everybody's saying, all the professionals that have been asked are telling you that he acted within his training, acted within the confines of the law, and he was placed in that few-second window to have to make that decision. We should make sure that this gets resolved in a proper fashion, and taking and giving some funding, or moving the funding to the AG's office, or getting this case heard by the AG's office is the best thing to do. Whenever these things happen, I always talk to my friends that I worked with in the past to ask them, what happened here? I don't ask for more than what they're allowed to give. But it doesn't take very long for them to figure out that he acted within the confines of the law. Support this Nash Amendment, folks. Support this Nash Amendment, and let's let's make sure that the trooper gets back to his life. A tragedy has happened, a life is lost. Nobody revels at that. Support the Nash Amendment.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Ingen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the Public Safety Committee, we heard a lot from our law enforcement professionals, first responders, about the need for increased recruitment and retention. We heard that they're struggling with mental health, they're struggling with morale, and we can try to address that with an appropriation. We can try to address that with some legislative solution to try to ease that. But nothing will fix it if things like this, the Trooper Lonergan case, continue, because it wipes it all away. It's a sad state of affairs when I'm standing here and advocating that the Attorney General's office take a case that involves a law enforcement officer. I definitely wouldn't have believed that I'd have done that a couple years back, but here I am. And that's because it's very clear that Mary Moriarty and her administration is more focused and engaged on activism than they are justice. Even with a simple Google search, you got a couple of news articles here that pop up, and there's pages upon pages of them. April 5th, 2023, County Attorney Mary Moriarty gives juvenile detention to convicted second-degree murderers. A.G. Ellison steps in to say that this plea was too lenient. Well, and then County Attorney Mary Moriarty plays the victim, ironically, and says that A.G. Ellison is acting against democracy. September 30th, in the Star Tribune, Sharice Barnett listened in disbelief as Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty explained that a teenager charged in her son's murder would be spared prison. Barnett echoes a group of crime victim families who say that they feel re-traumatized by her office's actions. KSTP, October 11th. This is just in the span of a couple months, guys. Antonio Moore was stabbed to death 5 months ago in Brooklyn Center, and Demetrius Harris was initially charged with second-degree murder. Harris recently accepted a plea deal from Mary Moriarty's office, pleading guilty to second-degree manslaughter, which likely only carries a sentence of 4 years. But then he got a police officer who does their job. All of a sudden, Mary Moriarty remembers that she wants to prosecute. This is so simple, guys. So simple. Reject the activism that's going on in our prosecutors' offices. Reject it wholeheartedly. You don't have to embrace it. You can stand up for justice. You can stand up for the folks that we, as a body, I know Representative Woody brings this up a lot. We remember our police officers on the days where there's vigils and funerals, but none of the other days. Show up today. Show up today for them. I remember last summer or 2 summers ago, I was canvassing the streets in Lino Lakes, and I had met an officer, a former officer, and he had told me a story that I think I'll remember for forever. He had said he had just gotten done pulling a 5-year-old out of a lake, a drowned victim, and he had attempted to resuscitate this drowned victim. And after 10 minutes, there was no avail. And then he got in his squad car, drove off, and people were throwing rocks at his squad, flipping him off and calling him a pig. After he just tried to help somebody. This is what we're dealing with. This is what our law enforcement officers are dealing with. And now they have an activist, rogue prosecutor that's going to go after them simply for doing their job. Because you get a couple headlines for it. It's sad, it's disturbing, it needs to stop. And today, with a green vote on this amendment, we can put an end to it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, I never thought I'd want the Attorney General Ellison to take over a case. But this time I do. I've been in the situation where we've had to do what a lot peace officers all across the state do not want to do. And that's to have to take somebody out. I was at the scene dealing with the call for about eight or 9 hours. The last thing we wanted to do is have to take his life. When it came to the end, I was by a building that the individual was armed, randomly shooting in the air. Another officer was off to my right, and the individual lowered that firearm towards me and that other officer and fired a round off. and the officer to my right took the life of that person. It was a clean shoot, but it was hours of paperwork, hours of reports, and it still lives with me today. Many officers involved in a shooting usually don't last long on the department, ends their career because it's the last thing they ever want to do. Now, Trooper Lonergan, I'm sure he didn't want to have to do that. We have 7 experts that said he did not commit a crime. It was a justifiable shoot. Even 2 of the defense or the prosecutor's experts have said that. Yet Mary Moriarty continues her persecution of law enforcement, an agenda she ran on to run as county attorney. Mary Moriarty is not doing her job. She's doing her agenda. That's not what the county attorney is supposed to do. They don't run on an agenda. They run to enforce the laws and prosecute those that commit crimes. Not to make up laws, not to decide which laws I'm going to enforce, which ones I don't. And unfortunately, she's given the other 86 county attorneys across the state a bad name. She had an opportunity to bring this case to the grand jury, which she did. But halfway through decided, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore, and ended it. I have a feeling, I'm not even going to speculate why that happened. But law enforcement officers generally have a fraction of a second to make that decision that they dread having to make. I don't know how many times in my 27-year career I had my firearm out and pulling on the trigger. Thankfully, it never went off. But the situation that it was happening, it required me to start going to that point. But thankfully, in that fraction of a second, things diffused so we didn't have to. Members, it is time to end activist county attorneys and actually do what's the right thing to do. It's time to move this case to the Attorney General's office and let him handle it. Please support the Nash Amendment.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, you've heard from a lot of my colleagues. Many of them are former law enforcement. Just how important it is to realize that what they do is hard. And if you've not noticed, a lot of our members do, I come up the main doors every single day and I shake the hands of the troopers and the former troopers that are here to protect us and to serve us, not for anything other than to show respect. To show the respect that I think that they are owed for the job that they do, which is to put themselves in between us and harm. And I want Minnesota to hear, I want folks who are around the world watching this case unfold to hear that, and I'm happy that Representative Novotny proved me wrong. I'm glad to be wrong in this case. 7 experts said that this was within a justifiable use of force. One last person that I hope is listening, and I respect the office of governor because he is our chief executive here in the state of Minnesota, and I would encourage him, implore him, beg him to take this case away from Attorney Moriarty. And I want him to do that, but I don't want to create, as we know, sometimes a negative vote, and I don't think this will go on to the bill, so I don't want to create that negative situation. So, Madam Speaker, I'm going to withdraw this amendment at this time because I want the governor to feel like he has backing of a lot of legislators, but not to create a negative vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Nash withdraws the A12 amendment. Motions and resolutions. Third reading. That's right. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 5216, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And so I wanted to first just thank Chair Mueller and being able to be, this is my second term on the Committee of Public Safety, and I continue to learn just so much. And this is one of those areas of government that is life or death. I mean, we just affect so many people's lives with this committee, and as a public safety being a core function of government, it's just such a impactful committee to be on. So I really appreciate being on the committee, and thank you really a lot for that. I appreciate being able to, especially as I'm learning more about so many different facets of public safety. You know, the Public Safety Committee doesn't just deal with the police. There's so many more other parts of it. And one of the most exciting parts for me was being able to take this summer to tour the DOC facilities and listening to the needs of the DOC, not only for their facilities, but also for the security officers there, was incredibly impactful to be able to listen to their stories. When I went back to my district to talk about their incredible need, many people I found had a lot of misconceptions of what that meant. Many people look at the idea of giving money to DOC facilities, especially where we house our IPs, that you know, these people have committed crimes and that we shouldn't be giving them any more money because, you know, how dare we give whatever to people who have committed crimes. And you know, you cannot, no one can accuse me of ever being soft on criminals. At the same time, people who have committed crimes at some point in time, unless they're there for life, will be leaving the prisons and the facilities, and they need to be people by the time that they leave those facilities. And I want them to be whole people, reformed people. And so it was just really impactful to be able to hear the stories about what these people, what our security officers are doing, the type of programming that is being funded to not only for IPs to learn skills, but to have so much more therapy and other things that are happening so that we can start that reconciliation process. And I remember talking in 23 about how important it was for us to have that in the right order, that I have been talking so often with people in my district and with other people that I have met around the state, that justice is not just going and serving time for your crime. That's not justice. Reconciliation is justice. Being able to have that reformation to do that. But in order to do that, in order to actually come to that point, we have to have accountability and repentance. And so those things have to come in that order. And it's been really, really good to be able to see what's happening at DOC. We got to have that chance to see the restitution circle, which was incredibly interesting and impactful as well. And so I really appreciated being able to have that. I also really appreciate being able to support the funding that we're putting for the crime victim services. I have heard incredible stories about the crime victim services in my district. And I mean, we have a tiny little office that may be staffed by 4 people right now. And the leader of the boss, the chief officer, I guess, of that place was talking about how one person was out on maternity leave, and so they were struggling to keep up with the need. And we are seeing that, members. We are seeing that after COVID, after shutdowns, after government overreach, of just isolation completely. You know, we are seeing the effects of that. We are seeing what is happening from lack of services, lack of human contact, complete isolation, seeing people who have struggled with drugs and alcohol, seeing those women who were in horrific situations. The crime victim services, I mean, as we have said in committee, if we could have given them more money, we would have. We know the work that they're doing not only is life-saving, but giving this money to the crime victim services allows our individual communities to meet the needs as they're seeing them there. And that's so important, and I really appreciate that. Of course, I can't say, I can't talk about this bill without talking about Mr. Otis, our therapy dog who came to visit us. And I really, really appreciated the bipartisan support of funding, at least putting the $100,000 to just starting to look at how we can look at innovative ways to support our first responders and our police officers as they are just dealing with a tremendous amount of pressure, a tremendous amount of mental stress, that they go and respond to things that we could never even imagine. I mentioned during committee that you know, when we think about the type of calls that our first responders respond to, and the amount of stress that is, you know, we as humans maybe see maybe 1 or 2 traumatic events, and our officers are responding to that every day, multiple times a day. They see over 100, maybe in a year. I mean, it's weighing. I've told the story before on the House floor of me going through the simulation of what it's like to respond to situations, and how traumatic that was for me. And it was a simulation. It was a simulation. And so any way that we can think outside the box to provide relief to our first responders is something that I think is a worthy cause, and so I really appreciate doing that. I would like to say that I am a little concerned about the traffic compliance study. You know, I did a ride-along recently, February it must have been, and I talked to my officer that I was riding along with and just said, hey, what do you think about this idea of and I know this is not in the bill, I understand, before people jump all over me, but just, hey, I kind of see the writing on the wall. Hey, how do you feel about this idea of not being able to ask the question of, hey, why do you know why I stopped you? Or possibly moving towards the idea of not being able to stop someone for expired tabs. And, you know, the police officer that I was with was really concerned about this move. And it wasn't that they wanted to be punitive. It wasn't that they wanted to be the tax collector. It was none of those things. It was, you know, we live in a community that a way for them to just stop and say, hey, dude, your headlight's out, or your tabs are expired. Like, we're not pulling you over, we're not citing you, we're just telling you for a punitive way. We're just trying to create that relationship of here is a way that I can just tell you and talk to you about what's happening. And again, the officer that I did a ride along with, he never talked about this idea that I'm trying to get someone and trying to create a hostile situation. It was honestly relationship building. At the same time, I watched, and you know, you learn things when you watch people who are boots on the ground. You learn things that afterwards you think, no duh, why did I not know this? But I'm not a police officer, I'm a teacher, and their everyday life is different than my everyday life as a teacher. And as I watched the police officer that I did a ride along with, every single stop, they're running those plates. Every single stop. And obviously that makes sense. I just didn't realize that. And so they are gathering information that not only could potentially get a potential criminal off the street, but they're also gathering information to protect themselves. I mean, they walk up to a car completely unknown to them. They know why they stopped them, but unknown to what else might happen. They don't know what they will encounter as they are stopping this car. And again, I know this is not in the bill, but I looked at how the task force was worded, and it seems as if, especially as I compare it to Representative Pinto's task force about illicit drugs and about the task force on domestic violence, both of those task forces were worded very different in we're gathering information, we're analyzing trends, we're looking at barriers, we're looking at offering suggestions. This task force specifically said how to do this without police. And I know we have police on the task force, and I know we have all those, but it seems as if this task force already has a foregone conclusion. And that's concerning to me. It's concerning that, you know, if we're looking at pretextual stops and we're looking at, you know, stops for expired tabs, let's look at that. But it says in the language that the conclusion that you already want. You're already looking for the conclusion of we want every other option except for this. And so I'm concerned about that. I think that's misguided. And so, gosh, this is such, I know this bill, especially in the policy bill, Representative Moeller did such a good job of making sure that we had bipartisan technical things, that the money that we're spending here is going to core functions and important functions. I really would have liked to see that specific task force re-envisioned or reimagined or just revisited. And so thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. I really enjoyed being on the Public Safety Committee, and I look forward to seeing how this bill will change after conference. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chair Moeller, for the opportunity to serve on the Public Safety Committee. Lead Novotny for the opportunity to serve with you. And all committee members, because I think we all bring different perspectives, and we had very respectful conversations. And at times you probably hear too much about my experience as a 27-year law enforcement officer, but you also pick up things. And we went on some field trips that broaden our, our scope a little bit. But the debates that we have, the conversations we have away are very important. One of the biggest things that probably came out of it, and it was just more of the public safety and not this bill, was how we reached across the aisle bipartisan solution for our school resource officers. And I do appreciate that and that relationship, which I think was very helpful in getting our school resource officers back in all of our individual schools. One of the things for me, and I'll say thank you to those on both sides who attended the funeral of the Burnsville officers to show our support that day. I do talk about 365 and finding ways that we can support them. And obviously, I was disappointed that my bill to untie the hands of law enforcement didn't get a hearing or action on the floor, because I do think it will have an impact in each of our communities. And Burnsville is the one now, but Minnetonka crosses both ways here. We've had other, it isn't a Republican or Democrat, it's gonna happen in our communities, and we really gotta trust our law enforcement sheriffs, police chiefs, that they will be able to use the money properly to keep our communities safe and utilize it how they can. I would ask you to, if you ever have the opportunity, go to Care 11. We need more armor, and listen to the audio from that. And that is kind of where I brought this idea for. This wasn't political for me. I wish it never got politicized, but it was really personal, because a lot of those voices you will be hearing were former partners of mine. One of the things I would like to have seen is, and we only had a small target of 10 million, but more for our officers in terms of recruitment and retention. We are down more officers now than we were last year. And that starts with us, with our rhetoric, but also it shows, we also have to show that we value them and give them the equipment, but show that support. I opened up my MPPOA magazine, and there was over 2 pages of retirements lately. And we're gonna need our law enforcement out there, and hopefully we can continue to show that support. So thank you for the opportunity to serve on the community and our committee, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Itasca, Representative Johnson. Santee, Representative Johnson. Boy, I'm really off tonight.
Madam Speaker, members. First of all, I want to thank Chair Becker-Finn for the Judiciary Committee. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we were able to work things out. And your portion of the bill is very respectable. I'm thankful that you took care of the crime victim services. It's a very important area. Those workers working with our victims of crime do a fantastic job. I'm also glad that you took care of the forensic examiners' rate increase. Unfortunately, they were skipped last year, and they are a very important part of our judiciary system, doing the exams for mental health issues in our court systems. So thank you for taking care of that. Public safety bill, except for basically one provision, is good. I'm glad they did the telecommunication, because those telecommunication officers is the lifeline between the officer on the street and everybody else and the victims of crime. They're getting the proper information so everybody can be safe. Now, unfortunately, over the past few years, we've had an attack on our law enforcement officers. That does need to change. Minneapolis is down about 50% of where they should be, and they wonder why they're not making traffic stops. Other officers are no longer making traffic stops because all a person has to do is just make a complaint with the post board, and it goes on file, but they never know who the complainant is. They don't keep track of the person complaining, so this could be the same one complaining about officers all over the state. We don't know. That information is not available. We wonder why the motor vehicle registrations aren't being paid for. That's because the stops aren't being made. We don't need a task force to find out why, because just traffic stops aren't being done. People know that, and so they're not buying their registration and their tabs. So that's an easy one to solve. Now, unfortunately, we have an issue that we need to deal with. When I first became an officer, went to the county to test for 0 openings just to get on a list. There's over 400 people applied. Nowadays, we have departments posting their position multiple times to get 2 or 3. If we don't have our law enforcement officers, there's nobody to keep us safe. I just read today that unfortunately St. Cloud State University is ending their criminal justice program. They don't have enough people in it. If they don't have enough people in their program, that means that the officers that we don't have replacements for the officers that are retiring. And we have a lot that are retiring. We're getting in the middle of the Clinton cop era when the federal government provided funds to increase the number of officers across this country. And they're about to retire. Overall, this is a good bill, except for the one provision that, again, takes away tools officers use for not only their safety, but the safety of the person in the vehicle. So unfortunately, with that, I will not be able to vote for this bill. I wish I could, because 99% of it is good. But I will never vote on anything that will make it harder for our officers to do a harder job and make it harder for them to be safe. Please vote against this bill at this time.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I wanted to do, members, is just make some general comments first about the overall bill, and then I do have a couple of questions for one of our members. Representative Becker-Finn, thank you for running a good committee, and your staff have been just wonderful, nonpartisan and our partisan staff. Carrie Kennedy, thank you so much for all of your support in the committee, and I think we did some good work there. Of course, we had our share of disagreements too, but I felt like it didn't get out of hand, which was really good, and it could have, because there was some pretty high-profile subject matter there that we were taking up. Members, as much as I would love to vote for this bill, we had a $17 billion surplus last year in order to fund, and we should have been funding the priorities of this state. I was shocked this year when some of the victims advocates folks made an appointment in my office and came in and said that they didn't get what they asked for last year. I was astounded that the Public Safety Committee didn't fund victims advocacy groups. If that's not a priority for us, I don't know what is, with an excess of money. And the same with the courts. We're funding the courts with some additional items that they're in need of, but again, we had a $17.5 billion surplus, and we didn't fund them all that they needed to be funded. Overall, that's my main concern with this bill, is that we're spending more money. It's not a huge amount, but in comparison to what was spent last year, but we're still spending more money for priorities that didn't get funded last year. And I find that just really unacceptable. And On the public safety end of things, I don't think we need a task force to study people to how to get people to comply with surrendering their firearms for domestic abuse orders. I have a bill for that. Wasn't given a hearing, House File 699, that requires the courts to hold a compliance hearing, a follow-up hearing after someone has been told by the courts that they need to surrender their firearms. I do have, those are kind of some of my summary of the bill, but I do have a question. If the Public Safety Chair Representative Mueller would yield to a question.
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chair Mueller, on page 34.21 of the bill, I'm assuming you have it there, but I'll let you get there. There's some stricken language there, and the stricken language reads, the executive director's salary is set in accordance with section 15A.0815 subdivision 3. And members, what that is addressing is the Cannabis Expungement Board director and what their salary would be. And that language is stricken, and so Representative Mueller, I'm just wondering what that, and I did ask this in Ways and Means, what is the executive director's salary?
Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this was stricken from the bill because it's basically a technical correction here. This citation was repealed last year in state government, so this is just conforming language.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So Representative Mueller, do you know what the executive director of the Cannabis Expungement Board, what their salary is?
Are you asking for Representative Mueller to yield again?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Representative Mueller.
Thank you. No.
Representative Scott.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Cleavorn yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Chair Cleavorn, this executive director's salary would be paid out of, I'm assuming, well, it was in this bill, but maybe would have been paid through your committee, through State Gov Finance. Do you know what the salary of, or even the salary range of the executive director of the Cannabis Expungement Board would be?
Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the director of the Office of Cannabis Management would be, the salary would be set by the Compensation Committee.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Cleavorn yield to another question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Cleavorn, I understand that they are now responsible for doing that, but my question is do you happen to know what the executive director of Cannabis Expungement Board, what their salary is?
Representative Cleavorn.
The Office of Cannabis Management's salary is set by the Compensation Board. I have no control over that, and it is not within my jurisdiction to set that salary.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it may not be in your jurisdiction to set it, but it would be in your jurisdiction to pay for it. I don't see Representative Stevenson on the floor. I was going to ask him to yield to the same question. Members, we have this director that's going to be in charge of expunging people's records who had past criminal records for marijuana, and the lead on the Public Safety Committee or the chair of the Public Safety Committee and the chair of State Gov Finance don't know the answer to how much that person is being paid. And I don't know if they're trying to find it. If there's anybody on the floor that knows the answer to that question, I encourage them to rise and just let the body know. I think it's a really, really good question. If there's a salary range, I think that we should all know what that is. Members, it's important work that we do here. We spend a lot of taxpayer money. And so a position like that, we ought to know. We ought to be informed of what a commissioner like that is going to be, what they're going to be making. for such a high-profile job, too, and an important job. Members, again, just to wrap up here, it's not a horrible bill, but it's not a great bill. And it should have been, all of these things that are being spent, have money spent on them in this bill should have been paid for last year. They're important things, and they should have been paid for last year. So I'm going to encourage a no vote. Thank you, members.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As Representative Scott just said, there are several things in this bill that are good and that I support. And one of those things that I support is the money for the victims' advocates, the crime advocates. Shocked that it came in at 10. They asked for 20. We knew that this was going to be a problem more than a year ago. We just had the gala for my local women's shelter or Domestic Abuse Advocacy Center. And at that gala, we knew it was a problem, and this problem was coming, and it wasn't addressed. I said in the first public safety hearing on this bill that we need 40, and I would have been the first one to sign on to a bill to get 40. There was some language in the bill that I found confounding, that was pared down quite a bit. I still don't understand why it needs to have that language in there. I was told that the office, OJP, has in the past had problems or not ethically, or there's some questions about the ethics in some of the funds being distributed. And at that last public safety meeting, I asked for a report on what exactly those were. I still have not got the report. So I don't know what that issue is. I'd like to get that addressed. Representative Whitty mentioned the problem that we have with officers retiring. From the MPPOA magazine, I went and counted it, 124. 124, and we talked about this because it's just shocking. We've never seen that many, I've never seen that many in the MPPOA magazine, 124 in one 2-month period. And if you go into the numbers, the problem is so many of those are not retirements. 6, 8, 10 years. That's people leaving because the ship has sailed and they can still see the shore and they're jumping now. So this is why we worry about the continuing poke. As I've said, the language on stops has considerably went down. Originally it was a poke in the eye, now it's more of a bump in the shoulder, but it's a bump in the shoulder we don't need. And I know it's going to be in your script talking points, so I'm just going to address this. And for everybody that's watching, please do not let the fact that I'm going to recommend a no vote be in no way saying that I don't support the victims' advocates. Those of us on this side of the aisle that spent our careers many, many, many times put our backside on the risk. We risked it all. Excuse me for trying to, I don't have the words when I'm trying to be politically correct and not get censored on the House floor. We put it on the line many times. We just saw how many cases that have come up since this started that officers have been hurt or injured or killed responding to domestic situations. Since then, I have publicly, personally, professionally, and financially supported my victims' advocates groups. So please do not infer that I don't support them when I recommend a no vote on this bill. I have one question for the Chair of Public Safety, if she would yield.
She will yield. Representative Novotny.
Representative Moeller, there's some question about the language on the PSAP bill. That's apparently you're working someone. Can you give us an update where we're at on the PSAP language?
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think you're referring to the 911 telecommunicators portion of the bill. Is that correct? Yep, you're nodding. So there was some stakeholder engagement that was done. It just wasn't done in time to get an amended drafted. And so it's my understanding that the stakeholders have reached an agreement and we're working to get that amendment ready for conference committee.
Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Chair Mueller, about that. Moving forward, I'm looking ahead and thinking of things that we can change. If I'm lucky enough to be back here in the next year, I think we need to take a long, hard look at our correctional facilities. And we need to start having that conversation about 5 years ago. If you've been to St. Cloud or Stillwater, you would know what I mean. That is a process I can't even understand how long it will take to get through, but we need to have that conversation soon. That would be a project that I hope that the members across the aisle can help me work with. We have different agendas in updating and remodeling, and not updating. I want to bulldoze 120-year-old prisons and replace them with things that are efficient and safe and allow for actual retraining and getting these people back ready to enter the society. So I hope I can get some cooperation on that in the next session. Thank you, Chair.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative Damath. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Couple things real quick. Actually, on the victim services funding, it's not in the spreadsheet, and we hadn't mentioned it previously. But one other thing we do in this bill is reallocate some of the funds from the MRRA, the Minnesota Rehabilitation and Act of that we did last year, Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act of 2023. That was my bill, and initially we had the savings from that program were going to be divvied up in 4 different ways, with victim services getting 25% and the general fund getting 25%. And we are reallocating this in this bill so that 50% of that savings will be going towards victim services. So that's one thing we wanted to do to sort of long-term address that this is an issue that continues to come up year after year. Also wanted to give a shout out to the Representative Mueller bill on therapy dogs. For law enforcement, we talked about expanding it a little bit in conference for all kinds of first responders. Some of you were lucky enough to be here today when Ashes, our therapy service dog from the Roseville Fire Department, was here for a visit today. But for folks who don't know, we have therapy dogs that they're not actually there. It's not like an emotional support animal. They're actually like highly trained dogs that provide needed mental health support for our firefighters and our officers. And so I think that's it's a small amount, but it's a really cool program, and I'm glad that Chair Mueller included that. And then finally, there was mention of priorities that didn't get funded last year. I just want to note, at least on the judicial side, judiciary side of the ledger, we did have a change in leadership in the administration of our Supreme Courts with the appointment of Chief Justice Natalie Hudson. And so, their priorities, as the Chief Justice, her priorities may have differed from the past Chief Justice, and so there is more of a focus kind of on the staffing as well as in the jury space. So I will note going forward, when there is more money, hopefully that one issue we are going to have to address moving forward if we want our criminal justice system to be fair and equitable is what we currently pay and how we support people in jury service. Currently, it's only $50 a day, which obviously, if you've ever had to park in downtown Minneapolis and find something to eat, $50 doesn't get you very far. So the courts had actually asked for us to increase that to $100 a day for jury service, but we just didn't have the ability to do that ongoing in this bill. But I hope that we will pay attention to that in the future when I am no longer at the helm. With that, it's a good bill, and I think we did a really good job with what we have in this supplemental year. Please vote green.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. It's been a pleasure working together on these bills together over the years. We're going to miss you. So I just wanted to address a couple of the things that were said. It is really perplexing to me that members would vote no on this because of a provision that they was referred to as a bump in the shoulder. That I think is in reference to the traffic stop language that we have in the bill that simply says a peace officer making a stop for those low-level violations must inform the vehicle's operator of a reason for the stop unless it would be unreasonable to do so under the totality of the circumstances. As Representative Frazier said, that's really basic and low-hanging fruit. And, another member across the aisle talked about the more positive contacts law enforcement has with people, the better off the whole situation is, the whole interaction is. And this is one of those things that we think really sets people up to have these positive interactions, both for the driver and for law enforcement. When you're starting the conversation with someone and you say, do you know why I pulled you over? You're automatically putting that person in the defensive. And so that's really what we're trying to do with this language. I heard a lot of reasoning from the other side about why you would not support the bill based on fears of things that actually aren't in this bill. And so that's also perplexing to me because you're talking about things that this bill doesn't even do. The working group that we spent some time talking about related to registration and tabs, that's really to make sure that we can adequately collect that revenue in the state, regardless of what happens, whether we take that out of something law enforcement can stop people for or not, which again is not in this bill. And I'll say that when we've had these conversations about that over the years, people, even the libertarian side, would say, we support that. We don't think law enforcement should pull people over for not paying their taxes. Now again, that isn't in this bill. We want to make sure that we're still collecting that revenue, regardless of whether we put something like that in a future bill. We know now that the numbers are down for people paying for those car registrations. And so whatever this working group does is going to help us collect that revenue. I've heard of some things like in other states, when you sell a car, that you actually keep your license plate instead of the plate moving with the car. That might be something that this group recommends that can help us make sure that we know that we're getting that income. So I think regardless of how you feel about whatever we do with stopping people or not for having expired tabs, I think whatever this group does is going to be really beneficial to us as a body moving forward. We did talk a lot about victim services. I talked about the needs already. Last year, we gave roughly $16 million to victim services funding. I'll remind members that the other side of the aisle did not vote for that funding last year. And it wasn't enough. There are a lot of unmet needs in the state. We funded a lot of other things last year in our bill too, like a lot of law enforcement needs. We had funding for $9.3 million for violent crime reduction with the BCA to help local jurisdictions, local law enforcement solve crimes. We had Representative Hewitt's bill for funding for training for law enforcement to recruit new law enforcement. We had Pathways to Policing funding. We had mental health supports. Again, we have that with the therapy dog bill this year. And then in the tax bill, we had the $300 million in public safety aid. So I just want to, there are a lot of unmet needs. Our committee has jurisdiction over a lot of things. Crime victim services are very important. We put $16 million in last year. The federal dollars are disappearing faster than we had predicted, and so we need to continue to fund that. And thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, for thinking of a creative way for long-term funding to help those programs that are needed. And then I'll just say, I do appreciate Representative Novotny, your mentioning Department of Corrections, and Representative Mueller, you talking about some of those tours and how beneficial they were. And I do really want to thank the committee members. We did do field trips. Collectively, individually, we saw Department of Corrections facilities, we saw jails, we talked to community groups doing violence prevention, we talked to Yellow Medicines doing great work around youth and restorative justice. Some of us toured 911 call centers and then domestic violence shelters. So it really was, we are really trying to get out and learn about all the great things that this committee has to do. And I will say, Representative Novotny, I share your desire to take a long, hard look at Department of Corrections. And I've said this in committee that I really hope over the interim we can have even a half day or a day long deep dive into a lot of those issues, not just with our facilities, but for our staff, for the people who are incarcerated there, for their loved ones. We really need to take that deeper dive. And I look forward to being able to do that work together. This is a great bill. There is absolutely no reason to vote against this bill, and I am still hopeful that that board can light up green. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The clerk will take the roll.
Will the clerk please call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 71 ayes and 57 nays, the bill is passed. Was it amended? As amended and its title agreed to.